What's your name and what are you known for?
My name actually is Herb Trimpe, and I worked for Marvel for about 30 years, and mostly known for the Incredible Hulk, which I did for 8 years, 90 some issues, and in latter day time, more or less Wolverine, which I first appeared in a Hulk comic, and I had well, now it's in retrospect it was a privilege and a kind of a lucky break, because it's paying off in lots of commission work and stuff like that. But at the time it was just another character, as everybody knows. I mean, there was no plans for greatness, no future vision of how that character would work out or would turn out, primarily because we did many secondary and tertiary characters who were just throwaway characters. There was a little bit more preliminary involvement in developing the character than most throwaway characters. Because a lot of the things I did, especially with the Hulk, was you had a basic plot, maybe you had the name of an individual character and with certain abilities, and you would just kind of shoot from the hip, going straight to the drawing, and just come up with something as you drew it. No model sheets, no pre-thought as to what the character would look like. And it kind of made it more fun, more like an adventure, not the committee mentality or the corporate mentality in terms of the thinking. But anyway, what's next?
I was going to come to that later, but it's an interesting issue that you guys did kind of create stuff on the fly. But Wolverine was not created by you, right?
It was.
Can you tell us about that?
It was the prime. The way it worked was this. I mean, I was in the office a good part of the time then, and I was there when John was working on the model sheet for the character. The way it worked was Roy Thomas came up with a concept. It was he came up with the name of the character, Wolverine, and he handed it directly over to John Romita in the bullpen to develop a character sheet. Len Wein, who was the writer at the time, developed a plot, the story outline, because in those days we were drawing not from full scripts. It was the Stan Lee way, which represented, which in my opinion was, there's a lot of argument about Stan's involvement in Jack Kirby, the conflict between the creative aspect. But the important thing that Stan did in terms of comics, which was truly, in my opinion, his genius, was the fact that he saw, though he was a writer himself, he saw the artist as the one who visualizes the story, not the writer. So even when I was doing story conferences with Stan, I was just coming away with verbal ideas that we would discuss, and with he doing most of the talking, obviously. And then I'd go down and I'd kind of write what I remembered, and the artist acted primarily as a director, like a movie director. Pace the story, lay out the panels. There was no panel description per se at all in terms of, to come up with the splash. I mean, it was totally artist-oriented as far as the story went. And then the writer, though having come up with a plot, was primarily the scripter. They wrote the story after it was drawn and followed the artist's lead. This was Stan's genius, and you have to give him an awful lot of credit for that, because now there's a lot of Steve listening? No, but there's a lot of writers have always pushed, and some of them are my favorite friends, they've always pushed to be in a larger spotlight. And I think that came about eventually, where they kind of took over the creative force behind a lot of the stories and the characters. But that wasn't the case, you know, in the beginning when Stan's influence was a very powerful motivation in terms of the way the books were produced. He only hired people that knew how to tell a story. Yeah, storytelling to him was like the important thing. And since it was, in his view, it was comics were primarily a visual medium, that it was the artist who should tell the story. Now, I've heard other versions of and claims as to how Wolverine came about, but it's and I don't want to, you know, take away anybody's ability to make a few bucks, you know, but it was Roy's concept and John's character design. The writer, in my opinion, gave the character a voice and actually collaborated with the artist in terms of bringing the character to life. So, which is no small thing, but it's not really the originator of, you know, the originator of the concept. If you had to pick out one individual that came up with the character, like John, the story he tells me is when Roy came to him and said, I need you to design a character based on this animal, it's small, it's aggressive, it's very fierce, and blah, blah, blah. John said he got the encyclopedia down. He thought Wolverine was a female wolf. He really had no knowledge of the animal at all. So he had to do some background research to get a picture of what this animal was like so he could do an outfit that was, and I've heard other versions from other people about how that came about, and no, I'm sorry. I mean, you can give writers credit on certain levels, and other levels, no, it's not so. And I've actually talked to John, and he'll say, "Well, I only designed the costume," and he said, I said, "John, the costume is the character. You understand?" And he said, "Yeah, well, whatever." The whole experience was kind of fun, and you know, it was not anything, and nothing was in those days. It was all deadlines and getting the work out and having some fun while you were doing it. It's kind of before comics got serious about themselves. It's still when you wouldn't dare bring one into a classroom in school, you know, without having your parents called in or getting, you know, or you know, getting extra homework assignments or something like that. I mean, it was still during that period, and it was really the most fun. I mean, I can't quite catch up or deal with the present view of how like important comics are in terms of the culture. I mean, they are to some extent, but they always have been, really. Just that nobody or many people didn't recognize it in the beginning, you know. I don't like to shortchange that kind of work. I had a neighbor that I had a print of a Klimt on the wall and some pages laying around, and she said, "Well, how do you get from this to this?" In other words, it's kind of a derogatory comment about how you go from fine art to junk art and, you know, kind of match. And my answer was, you know what, it's the same thing. I'm sure Michelangelo, the Sistine Chapel is a giant comic book, basically, with huge splash panels like they're doing comics now, like one right after the other. You know, those guys would have been drawing comics today. because there's no place for commercial artists to do that kind of work anymore. You know, I mean, it's all digital. You know, so they'd be doing comics. All the fine artists would be Rubens, the whole bunch of them. They'd be drawing. They'd be John Buscema. You know, I mean.
So you brought up so much in all that you've just said. It's interesting to me. I wasn't sure if comics were fun or if it was just a job to pay the bills. But
it was a job. I mean, to me, it was fun. I mean, I like directing it. I've worked from scripts since then. Just recently, I did 14 pages for IDW. I hated it. I can't deal with a script because and Larry did the script, and he's a great scripter, and I mean he's a good artist. So you don't have to like reinterpret what he's seeing so much. But one of the problems with working through an writer is to interpret what they're saying in these detailed, verbose scripts and put it back into your own terms so that you can kind of pace it and handle it. See, that the way Stan did it was you're eliminating that stage and you go straight to the storytelling. Oh yeah, this would make a great splash. This would make a great, cinematic sequence. But with a script, it takes that away from you. You know, and not all writers are good visualizers. You know, and what happened is when the writer's in total control, you'll come up with scripts that are 10 times as long as the printed book. It's like reading a mini novel, you know, just to go through one freaking 20-page story. I mean, I'm a writer. I don't want nothing to do with, writers as far as having to follow their lead. That's why I'm not drawing comics now. Because I'm disagreeable about everything, practically.
You have the way that you did it for years.
Right, sweetie? I'm a disagreeable person in terms of...
Sometimes, only sometimes.
It's on film. It's on film.
You had the way that you did it for years, and then when it started being done different ways, you liked the way you were doing it.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much through the whole time I worked there, I didn't work from full scripts.
Every year we love it. Yes.
The plots got very lengthy though, and some were even suggestive of complicated dialogue. But I was still left with the task of breaking the story down. Whereas if you get a scripted story, it's panel by panel, page by page. I mean, where the hell does that leave the artist? I mean, you're just like, you're a flunky. You're a writer's flunky, basically. And I just I don't like that. I mean, neither did Kirby or Romita or Buscema. They were prime, talented, visual people who had a movie director's mind, actually. And that to me is the fun of comics. I mean, you're doing this sequential art. If you're copying somebody else's version of what it is, it's no fun. So,
So, what did you think when you saw these characters that you just kind of thought of as throwaway characters were becoming these icons? You watched it happen.
Well, I was out of the business. I mean, I was pretty much out of the loop. I mean, by the time I had started working at home, and especially after moving out of the city, I went into maybe Marvel first it was once every couple of weeks, then it was once every month, then it was once every year. I mean, I didn't really know what was going on anymore. So I didn't pay any attention. I didn't know who was working there. I didn't know anybody there anymore. I think probably the last intimate contact I had with Marvel through people that I knew was probably when Tom DeFalco was editor-in-chief, and after he was gone, things got pretty weird after that. I mean, I went through the shooting years, that was fine, and DeFalco, and then that was kind of it. Those other guys got in, they didn't really know me. They didn't like what I did. I mean, I was glad to get out when I did. Let's put it that way. A lot of people say, gee, the way they treated you and those other... No. Thank God. that